Hey everyone, I'm here with Pax, and we just wanted to say that the Chapter 2 talents are pretty good. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's these cards, the ones that came into the core set and are the ways that you boost your skill value by spending some resources. So, yeah, here they are. Pax, do you want to talk about them so I don't just talk through the beginning of this video? Like, what
Yeah,
are
sure.
these?
They all cost two resources. They all have two icons, and they all have a condition in which you spend one resource for +1 to a skill or +2 during a specific type of test, and then another ability of the same thing but for a different skill in the
Yeah.
same types of tests.
So endurance is the
Uh,
guardian one. It's attacks or evasions using combat or agility. Sharp rhetoric is the seeker one. It is predictably intellect or willpower for investigations or parlays. Silver tongue is the rogue one. That one is evasion or parlays, intellect or agility. And then here are the other two. Spiritual intuition is the mystic one. Level headed is the survivor one. Spiritual intuition is kind of the oddball here because it is only for spells or rituals and has kind of a bizarre uh in addition to willpower, it's also combat. And then level-headed is kind of also weird because it's the bonuses for scenario cards. And that means tests that are printed on scenario cards like a treachery or an enemy that has a test that says parlay with me and do something. So
or locations.
locations indeed as well.
Yep. Acts and agendas, all sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Additionally, there is a level 3 version of all of these, and it just simply adds the word starting. It is the starting keyword that means that I'll put the rules up here, but it means that you are guaranteed to see this card, one of your starting cards, in the beginning of the game. So after you mulligan, if you didn't find it, you'll go search your deck and get a copy of it. So also additional icon, wild icon on all of these with a big asterisk, but all of these have extra wild icon.
all of them.
All of them. Okay. So that's what they are. They're pretty simple cards, and I think they're pretty good. Here are some good reasons why I like them, and why I think Pax you like them too.
That's
Whoa,
right.
man, they're all there right now. Okay. One +2 for one resource is really good. That's like excellent value. We'll talk about some of the old talents in a bit, but this is strong. I think for level 0 to put one resource into getting two skill value back.
Yeah, that's right. And someone said this in the Mythos Busters Discord a while back, where they said uh, a single instance of +2 tends to be more than two instances of +1, which I found really interesting because I feel like, you know, going up on one test from being like 1 up to 3 up tends to get you a lot of the bag that you're suddenly passing, as opposed to only being 1 up where, maybe you're only 60%. Getting all the way to 3 up is like everything except for the -4 in the auto fail.
And it's worth
Um,
saying here that in case you're new to the game, there's no limit to spending your resources. You can spend 2 and get +4, and that's also really good.
right, and that starts putting you into the realm of like passing a test that your character would otherwise have no business even attempting, right? Uh, Bringing a 2 agility guardian up to to 6 is suddenly like, oh, maybe I could actually just pull off an evade and not need to waste my Winchester blast on this guy, right?
Yeah.
Or like you said, or in the instance of the Winchester, dump $2 into this shot to get a +4 so that I'm way more likely to succeed by a huge margin and blast this thing into Kingdom Come.
And I think for a lot of investigators, again, you get access to 2 of them at level 0, so you've a whole suite of things that you're suddenly able to do very well at. Resources are funny in this game because you get to carry them over round by round, so you're not having to say at the end of the scenario, say, well, what am I going to do about this? How am I going to pass this tough test? I have 8 resources. What am I doing with those resources? Maybe it's just dumping them into tests.
That's right. And it also tends to be that tests kind of get more important as the scenario goes on.
Hmm.
It's not that you don't have important tests early in the scenario, but like, quite a lot of scenarios end with like a boss enemy, in which case, hey, covering the entire bag for every fight because I have, a couple of turns of upkeep that I didn't meaningfully spend on assets. Like it just makes sense
Yeah,
to
the
help you
tests scale,
get there.
right? They get more difficult, and like the skull tokens or other tokens might
Yep,
get tougher at the end too. So it's
that's right.
perfect timing for that sort of thing. I think level headed and endurance are the two most impressive ones to me because they counter the encounter deck very handily, right? The enemies are the things that you tend to attack or evade. That's with endurance there. And level headed is for basically all the treacheries. So it's nice for Daniela to have access to all of that. And I just think those kinds of abilities are just generally useful. So I like those a lot. And then Sharp
Yeah,
Rhetoric and Silver Tongue, those are the Seeker and Rogue ones, also make a lot of sense in class because it's the right skills. The parlays are generally in those two classes also. And the evasion also is quite strong. I've seen Silver Tongue do a lot because you get refunded with sticky fingers too. So that is a nice little
yeah,
synergy
that's
there.
true. I think that makes sense as well for Sharp Rhetoric with, having Dorothy in play. It's like,
Hmm.
okay, I get a +2. If I succeed by 1 or 3, then I get my dollar back, right?
Yep.
It's similar to the sticky fingers, but obviously a different payout rate. And I think that there's something interesting to do with like level headed in the way that you can like play that once, spend a dollar here or there for some +2s. You're probably running timely intervention, and
Hmm.
so like it's it's kind of letting you push those margins a little bit. If your stat is not that good, like Daniela, yes, you can hold a timely intervention in your hand for your like an agility test, right?
Hmm.
But maybe you put a dollar in so that if you get a -3, you can still commit the timely intervention to pass this thing, right? Rather than needing to get a 0 or a -1 uh, to be able to use the card.
Now, you and I generally play on standard, but if you're playing hard or expert, I think these cards are just even more important because you just don't have ways of covering a -6 or a -8 that consistently if you aren't putting some money into something like this. Does that sound
Mm.
accurate to you?
I think so. I also haven't played a ton of hard and expert. I've played a couple of hard campaigns, but I
Mhm.
I mostly don't enjoy just needing to test way higher. But that is generally what I read from people who play hard regularly is like, well, instead of typically wanting to be 2 up, you typically want to be like 3 or 4 up. Um, and so having a card that would let you spike from 3 or 4 up to 5 or 6 up is you know, probably pretty good. I imagine you're like more strained on resources typically just because, you know, if you're needing to be that high up all the time, you're
Right.
probably putting more into everything.
Hmm.
But all the same, like, you get your upkeep money and you have your economy in your deck that you included to play the cards you want to set up with.
Right. And I'll just
So,
say the reality is in chapter 2, which right now is just the core set and the Evergreen Investigator decks, this is what we have. We don't have a whole lot of other ways to consistently get skill boosts, so we do just have to kind of make use of this stuff. So I think it's a good time to now transition to talk about like why people might have be a little down on these or maybe confused by these and what they do and what they don't do. Compared to the chapter 2 stuff, which admittedly was a whole lot of cards and a whole lot of powerful stuff together. This was, I think, a attempt at rebalancing the talents from the original core. So let's kind of do a little comparison. And I think part of the reason why people don't like see these as good as we do is there's some memory of those chapter 1 talents, which were legitimately tough to play because they cost 2 resources, like the current ones do as well, an action to play, and then you have to spend resources to get anything out of them. And look at Dig Deep. This was the Survivor one. It is identical to Level Headed, except for it doesn't give that extra bonus for scenario cards. So it's like a
right.
strict upgrade, right?
Yes. And like, let's be clear, this card sucks. Like, even in early uh 2016 core Arkham,
Yeah.
this was not like a card you liked to play. it was a card that was in the deck because occasionally the conditions for it working would show up.
I think the other
But
ones were also like similarly not great, but they were certainly better. The Arcane Studies was okay. Physical Training, it's expensive in Guardian. Hyper Awareness was a little confused, I think, with agility right from the core. And then Hard Knocks, I think, felt a little better because there was more of the incentive to get money in Rogue. But all in all, I
mhm,
put this one here mostly because it's just a strict, oops, this was bad. Let's make it better.
yes, exactly. And it's astonishing just how much better that extra condition is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you look at that difference and you don't think it's going to amount to much, but it actually goes a long way.
So that's the core. We also had the permanent ones that came out very soon after, and these, in my opinion, swing the other direction of being too powerful, at least higher education and streetwise. The other three are really weird. They're very different cards. I think Scrapper is like the most similar to what we're seeing here, but the mere fact that they are permanent is huge. So higher ed
Yes.
itself reads very similar to spend one resource, get +2, but for 3 XP to not have to include this as part of your deck to draw, you're just starting with it in play, is incredible. The 5 cards or more isn't like nothing, but it's very close to nothing for seekers to have
Yeah,
to get to.
it doesn't take much for a seeker to get to 5 cards and maintain it unless you're playing like solo and you get really taxed on enemies really early.
Right.
Like it really is not that big of a deal.
I mean, this card is absurd, honestly. And the fixed version, Sharp Rhetoric, it can read kind of similarly because you can spend one resource and get +2, but you're only doing that for certain kinds of actions. So, I mean, I think that higher ed using willpower to protect yourself is extremely strong. You get a rotting remains and you're like, that's okay. I'm not going to die as Monterey Jack or Joe Diamond because I have higher ed to pump my money into. That's just not the case with Sharp Rhetoric. That card doesn't do that. So maybe people are thinking that those cards aren't as strong because they look at this and say, but I remember how good this is. This is too good.
Yeah, this is a card that is just about difficult for me to play in standard and feel like I'm, approaching the game in a way that feels fair to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's not unfair, but I'm still kind of like, this feels like I'm really pushing past where I like to be against what the game is throwing at me.
We'll talk about starting in a second, but permanent is just way stronger. So just leave it there.
Yes, permanent is much stronger.
So the level fours, those came out around what Innsmouth starter decks era, and
Yep.
there was also level twos, but let's forget about those for a second. The level fours of the talents are much better. They give you resources at the beginning of every round to spend on the talents. You get the same uh, +1, which is fine for any test, but you get the money, right? That's really nice. And I
Hmm.
think all of them, all four of them work really well for whichever investigators are taking them. It's an
All
interesting
5 of
all
them.
5 of them. You're right. Sorry. All 5. Um it's interesting to compare them to the power level of the level 3s that we have now because these do cost more. I think they're generally better because you don't have to spend your own money into them, but
Right.
maybe these were
These
too powerful too. I don't know.
I don't I see the thing is I don't I think people underrated these, but also like the people that did play them kind of rated them because
Hmm.
like they're good. They're good, but they're not like nuts. And for 4 XP, it really bites into what the rest of your deck is doing at 4
That's
XP a
true.
piece
4
in a
XP is
way that
not
I
cheap.
don't think that's like 3 XP for one starting card necessarily does.
Hmm.
And like you said, you pay 2 resources for this once, and you get the 2 resources for 2 +1s or a +2 every round thereafter.
Hmm. And these can
And so,
stack. You
like,
can have two of them.
yes, you can have two of them, and then also you can pay extra money into them beyond the resources that they replenish. So, like,
Indeed.
they can be more expensive if you need to get like the +4s out of them.
Hmm.
But I guess realistically, if you got two free resources and then spend two resources, that's 2 for 4. It's kind of the same rate as the 2016 core cards.
Hmm.
Um, I guess the big thing though is this play cost, right? Um, paying two resources for the privilege of spending more money is something that feels expensive in a way that the permanents just aren't ever,
Right.
right? In comparison. But the more of it you use them in that, two for one ratio, the more of it that initial cost kind of melts away into the overall cost. Um, and I think
I,
that's a big part of the balance there.
I think you also end up using these level fours to use both of the stats and not just one of them. Sometimes people just are like, well, I'm a mystic. I'm going to use my willpower for everything. Great. This is like two holy rosaries or something. But you can also cobble together an intellect test pretty well if you have the money lying around. So I like these quite a bit. I didn't put
Mhm.
the composures here as another comparison, but I think those just are different because they have soak and whatnot. But that is another way that Chapter One let you pay for some resource
Yeah, that's
boost.
true. I
Hmm.
think the soak and the static boost, without even accounting for the pay to boost, is makes them different enough to
Yeah,
be.
those are crazy
But they
cards
are
too.
but they are all really good cards as
Yeah.
well.
Okay. The other one I think to compare is the Hemlock Mask. So these are very similar in that you spend one thing and get a +2. But it's also
Mhm.
really cheap. This is one resource to put into play, no slot, just like the talents. And then there's a replenish condition. So you're not really spending your resources ever after you spend the initial one, which is actually quite good if you're thinking about the economy side of things. But I think because of that, it's hard to make that comparison because if you get too used to the mask situation, you're like, I'm never going to pay money to get +2 to a evasion or a fight. Then yeah, the new stuff looks kind of bad, but that's not a legit comparison. But even so, tell me about why these are kind of different anyway from what the talents let you do.
Yeah, so, I mean, the first thing is, like you said, compared to, say, like, those level 4, talents from chapter 1,
Hmm.
you only get 1 mask, so you can't stack them. Um, yes, it's very resource cheap for these because they replenish themselves, and you spend 1 offering that you can replenish all the time for +2,
Hmm.
but, you do not get that use case of just dumping your excess material into a test because of this limit once per test that's printed on them, right?
Hmm.
You don't walk away with that same feeling of that endurance gives you of like, I could just dump some money into a wild evade. That Wolf Mask doesn't do that. Wolf Mask gets you part of the way there, and you can have more cards in your deck because you've saved so much money on this, right? You've only spent one resource to get these +2s every now and again. You can use a lot more of your deck to cover that, but it doesn't give it to you just in the one card.
Yeah.
Um, and so you just don't get that suddenly crushing a thing that maybe you don't have any business doing, or just, you know, in a tough enough instance, having one card that does the thing you need to do, right? Um, Not to get too deep into the contents of chapter 2, just because we're kind of talking about this at a high level player card perspective, but like there's plenty of retaliate things that have a high enough combat test where it's like, yeah, I might need a +4 if, you know, my gun's running out of ammo or something
Exactly.
like that.
And Wolf Mask only does part of that for you. That said, we're not here to argue that the masks are not powerful. They are. And maybe again with this rebalanced chapter 2 environment, they said, let's dial that back a little bit.
Yeah, don't get it twisted. The masks are very strong cards.
Yep. So last thing to sort of mention is people might look at the talents and say, okay, I can see that they do something, but how am I ever going to afford this? What kind of economy even exists in chapter 2 to allow me to do this kind of stuff you're suggesting, when in chapter 1, with a full legacy card pool, you can have all kinds of crazy economy cards. I think this is a bit. I think people jumped the gun here because we probably saw this commentary more when we just saw the core set cards and not the evergreen investigator decks. I think the economy got a lot better with an increased card pool. Who'd have thought, right? More cards would give us some more options there. And of course, we're going to get more stuff too. The idea with a current environment is that it has more than just those two sets of cards. It's going to have whatever is that year's investigator deck building stuff, investigator expansion, and then actually it'll go on for like three sets of things. So we should have a lot of cards to make this stuff work. But that said, I think the economy is perfectly fine. We got in Rogue a crazy economy card out the door. We got Watch This. We have Sticky Fingers, we said before. I don't think economy is that big of a deal. Guardian got Bounty, which is really good. I understand the idea that how do I pay all my money into this, but there is decent economy available.
I guess the one thing I'll say is that, like, it seems to me that sometimes there can be a big disconnect between what you imagine your deck doing and what actually gets handed to you in the course of play. And it's very easy to sit there and theory craft about the game and be like, well, I'd like to have all these cards in play, and that's going to cost me this much, and this is how many resources my economy cards add, and this is how many turns the game lasts. But I
Mhm.
really want to have all this stuff out in the first like 5 turns or so. It's like, okay, sure, but if you've got everything out in the first 5 turns or so, then you've got, like 10 more turns worth of upkeep. And so by the end of the scenario, you can be, you know, if you don't have a lot of like expensive events you're playing throughout, or assets that are not that big of a deal to play later just because they're necessary, right? A sticky fingers play early in the scenario is much better than a sticky fingers play late in the scenario.
Yep.
That kind of thing is obvious. But if unless you have a really good way to continue spending your money throughout towards the end of the scenario, um, my experience playing Chapter 2 has been that I am consistently sitting around with my upkeep, getting more money than I really am, like more than I was concerned that I would need, kind of thing.
Hmm.
You know, a Dexter deck where I was running 2 E-Cash and his signature as the economy. And I would play like a spell and an ally. And like it was functioning. I was doing the things that I needed to do to progress the game. And I had money to play stuff when it eventually came up.
It's
And I
funny
feel
you.
like
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I feel like that's something that you can do with the talents as well. And I've had that happen with, like Trish, like you said, you have your sticky fingers in play. It's like, okay, well now from now on, whenever I get an enemy, I'm basically walking away with an extra dollar. And all of a sudden the silver tongue that I've got in my hand seems real enticing to play, so that these uh, higher stakes evades that are going to come up later are going to be like handled because I'll need them to be handled.
I think that it, Mystic, I've played Guardian even, and I felt like there's been enough resources, partly because some of those cards just last a bit longer, right? The new Cosmic Flame, Second Sight, even Tommy's ability to make guns last a bit longer, and they're cheaper too, right? The M1911s are one resource cheaper than the equivalent 45 automatic
Mm-hmm.
in Chapter 1. All these things together do feel like I'm not having to replay all this stuff all the time. So maybe that's part of the story too, that maybe things aren't as expensive. I mean, I would not totally sure that's true. I think the Guardian allies are all a bit pricey, but it does feel like I haven't had a big problem trying to play my 50 million things just to make anything happen in the game. I think the card pool is just more cohesive in that sense. So
Mm.
you
I
can,
think, especially kind of going back to Mystic really quickly, it's
sure,
like you play your gym, you play your spell, but
yeah,
then you've got all these skills that can give you a decent amount of skill value. and you've got a couple of pretty cheap events like Premonition and Will of the Cosmos, and it's kind of like it just carries you a lot further than you might think it would,
Hmm.
I think. And it gives you an opportunity to play a card that lets you just dump some money into something because, you know, yes, some of the cards are quite expensive. You know, if you play Second Sight in a gym, yeah, you're paying $8, right?
Yeah.
But that's your starting money plus an emergency cash. You've got the rest of the scenario ahead of you.
And with Marie's deck, you have your Offering Bowl and whatever that Favor of Balshandor card is to reduce some
Mm-hmm.
cost. Like there's stuff. It's not, they did not leave us destitute of economy. So you know what? If
Seeker is the only one that
yeah,
I have felt a little crushed on economy. And even then, you know, you you can stand around taking investigate actions and not having the time to play stuff because you just need to gobble up some clues, and all of a sudden you've got a couple of upkeep phases under your belt, and you've got the money to play your next thing you need.
but it's
It's it's
funny.
it's a very interesting way that things have kind of come about and balanced themselves.
I do agree about Seeker, but maybe you can just look at your magnifying glass or whatever else and say, that'll be good enough for now. And you just don't play the sharp rhetoric until later. Or maybe that deck doesn't need it. Like, as much as I think these cards are pretty good, you don't have to throw them in every single deck if you don't want to.
Yeah.
Okay, last couple points here. The starting keyword, I think this also threw people off. I don't want to relitigate this. I was the one who uh, unleashed this on the world, I suppose. The two of us, actually, in the preview of Endurance.
Yeah.
Uh, look, it's not as strong as permanent. Oh well. I think people need to get over it, right? What it does is guarantees that you have the card at the beginning of the game. You don't have to play it right then, but you have it in hand. So, look, do I wish that the level threes were slightly better or this were written a little differently for ease of understanding or whatever? Sure, but that doesn't make it a bad ability. So I don't know. Just get over it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I again going back to a previous discussion in Mythos Busters. I said I think the problem lies in conceptualizing it primarily as getting an extra card. The ability lets you start with the card in your hand. Period. That is
Yep.
what the card. That's what the ability is trying to do. Sometimes that manifests as an extra card, and sometimes it doesn't. But you do start with the card, and so like you just don't spend the XP if starting with the card is not something you need. And a lot of the time, sure, maybe it isn't. But I feel like there's a lot of compelling reasons to be running some of these talents. And if you've got two of them in your deck, you could shave down to one and spend 3 XP on a starting keyword and then have that other card slot being going towards something else.
Yeah, I agree. You could have a bit more economy in your deck to afford putting your money in there. And it again, if you I think people look at this and say, well, why do I want to start with it? They probably overlook all the stuff we talked about why this is a decent card to actually win the game. And all of these little things, I think it's just like a death by a thousand cuts when viewed through, I think, these lenses that are just not fair to these talents. Then it's just like one more thing on top saying, well, I don't even like this card. Why would I want to start with it in my opening hand? I'm like, gosh, well, I think that's just the wrong attitude to take with these.
Yeah.
And maybe that leads to the last point here is I agree. Like paying for a skill boost is not particularly exciting. It's not committing some interesting skill cards that give you extra benefits. There is a little bit of synergy with, say, succeed by stuff in Rogue, but otherwise, all it does is help you pass the test, which is important. It's truly important in this game, but it's not an interesting way of doing it.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's like it's a card game. You want to be using cards to do stuff. This is using a card to do stuff, but it's also using a bunch of pieces of cardboard
Yeah,
and pushing them around and saying, haha, look at my skill value go up. So
right.
I can understand it not being exciting.
But that's okay. It's a core set card. It doesn't have to be. Like, we'll see other versions of this. I suspect we'll get maybe a different version of the composures or, whatnot. I do like that all of the stats on these were the same as that we got on the masks. So they did kind of figure that these are the stats that make sense for these classes. They want to stick with that. Then maybe we'll get something else that's similar, or who knows. But I think as a foundation, fantastic.
Yeah, no, that's right.
With only the spiritual intuition. You made a comment to me earlier about like, well, the problem with that one is generally that the spells already are giving you some boosts, and this idea of using combat or rituals is just like not supported yet. Um, what about
Yeah,
like there was like
it's kind
ritual
of a
dagger or
confluence of a
something?
lot of stuff, right?
Yeah,
Like it's like, we've still got the Bloodstone for the +1, we've got Jim for the +1, and since there's this whole um, what do you call it, like archetype of taking damage alongside Jim, uh, where you're drawing a lot of cards,
a lot of skills.
you get a lot of skills, and they've got all of these really high wild icon skills, and so it's like you kind of walk away from it going like, wait, why would I, if I'm Dexter, why would I play Silver Tongue if I can just commit a blood curse and,
Yeah.
be testing at 7, right? And just draw tons of cards. Lucky Cigarette Case in Dexter as well, right? Um, there's a lot of other ways to manage that in Mystic by just focusing, upgrading your arcane slots, right?
Hmm.
There's so many ways to come by that willpower boost, and until they have a bunch of like reasons to boost combat on spells and rituals, I really don't see it being that good. Someone did mention running a copy of it in Amina,
Was it you?
bringing it back to Chapter 1, just
Yeah.
running a copy of it in Amina because you can play things for $0 so often that you can just dump all of your money into +2 willpower
No,
for
it's
your spell
true
use.
because the problem, well, one of the problems I think with the permanent talents is that the Mystic one, you put Doom on it to get +3 to two different
That's right.
stats that didn't actually use resources at all, so it was bizarre.
Yeah,
And yeah, I mean, having kind of loads of cash around because for ability, there was really not much that she could do with it.
that's right.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. But that one is kind of weird, and it kind of landed in its own unique spot of, I think a couple of people have said they would have liked it to say relic instead of ritual, or something like that.
yeah,
Um, I was hoping it would have said something like like 4 tests on events or something like that, so you could have those like read the signs kind of abilities and be able to boost them. But um, where it landed is a little unfortunate, but it's still not like strictly bad. It's just that there's other ways to, there's a million ways to skin a cat, and some skinnings are easier.
anyway, let's not dwell on the negative stuff to end. I think overall they did a good job with making cards that function, especially compared to I think finding a nice middle ground between the level 0 cores that were just not good from 2016 and the permanents that were kind of all over the place, but probably too good for some of them.
Mm-hmm.
Something that's a bit more stable to work with as a foundation for chapter 2. So I like them. They do the thing. They don't do a huge thing, but potentially they can, and give them a shot. All right, thanks Pax for joining me. We'll see you in another video, hopefully some other discussions. But this was just kind of on our mind recently, so I thought we'd talk about it together.
Yeah. Bye.